Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Devin Hasson, Bryan Murphy, and Chris Jackson. Gentlemen, it is a Thursday, and for the first time all season, we have to play some long-awaited catch-up on some high school soccer. I always feel like we have to preface the very first high school soccer podcast of the school year with an apology, because high school soccer comes at the absolute worst time of the athletic schedule from a coverage standpoint. It is sandwiched right in between the real meaningful part of basketball season. So for a lot of us, how many high school soccer matches have you been able to get out to this season? 0 for Bryan. Devin? 2.
I just went to my first on Tuesday.
And I'm yet to cover one. So it's all dependent on basically how soon our basketball coverage ends, because late season, high school basketball, when district championships, playoff races are at stake, that's just going to supersede just an early district match for soccer. And
throw in a couple weeks where we focus on realignment and signing day and all that stuff in the middle of it. That's right when they're getting involved in their district season. Yeah, it's tough.
They always do catch the short end of the stick, but yes, with our basketball coverage essentially being cleaned out now, we can finally turn our attention to high school soccer.
And at least you don't look as bad as I do. My Frisco ISD is 14 district games in. They have 4 games left. And I'm over here sorry, guys. Y'all play the same day as these third-round basketball games.
Yeah, so we're just going to play a little bit of catch-up today. Now, obviously, we can't get to everybody. There's a ton of high schools out there that we have to cover. But nevertheless, so let's focus on, I guess, some of the more prominent storylines right now as we enter in to the home stretch, because there's really only a couple weeks left in the regular season. I do want to start though by asking, next week is spring break. How many of your districts are playing district matches next week during spring break for high school soccer?
None of mine.
None of yours for Devin?
They've changed the schedule to a Monday game. We've got teams off later in the week, so it's just completely jungled up. I was wondering why, but I guess spring break's just so early.
How about you, Bryan? Frisco ISD taking the week off?
They are taking the week off.
Okay.
Yeah.
They've used it before as kind of a weather makeup time.
For sure.
I've had games during spring break before. If we did get bad weather where they had to cancel a couple games or postpone them, I should say, they take advantage of that week off. But, yeah, for the most part, I mean, as far as I can remember, there's spring break for soccer is always off. Other sports, not so much.
It's interesting for District 9-6A because they're off Friday as well. So we're basically now in the phase of kind of the calm before the storm, so to speak, because after Tuesday's matches, District 9-6A will not resume action until March 17th. So they've got a pretty substantial break right here. Now, granted, do you ever really get a break in high school soccer given the club commitments that a lot of these kids have? So, take that for what it is. But
I've had kids, Wakeland, Mark Barbonis, tell me stories about after they played at State, they had to go play a club game the next morning at 8 a.m.
Yeah. And a lot of them have club tournaments and select tournaments during spring break, which is one of the reasons they elect to take that time off, because it's a chance for a lot of them to go play with their other teams.
These kids are all being worked way too much. But
that's kind of ridiculous. You win a state title, oh, congrats, you got to play another big game tomorrow at 8 a.m.
Yeah, that game,
you get no time to celebrate.
That game ended at 4 o'clock. Win a big state title, and then drive up from Georgetown to play a game at 8 a.m. the next morning.
So, so with District 9-6A, they're going to be off for a little bit, but it's really setting up, though, for a fascinating final week, because we have two nights left, I should say, on the District 9-6A soccer schedule, and there is no team in the district that has locked in its playoff seed. Now, we have 2 teams in boys and girls that have clinched playoff seeds, Allen and Prosper. That's it, but they don't know what seed they're going to be. So, so the district championship is far from decided. The 4 playoff teams are far from decided. So, Bryan, we've talked about, on the podcast how it's great to see this budding rivalry between Allen and Prosper.
I love it.
As finally seeing a school that can push back on mighty Allen, and really across the board in all sports and whatnot. And you've really kind of seen that over the last year and a half with the job that Prosper has done acclimating to Class 6A. Now, granted, as they build more high schools, who knows how much longer they're going to be a 6A team, so this rivalry might be a bit short-lived. But for the time being, though, it's been great, and wouldn't you know, but you look at the standings right now in 9-6A, both boys and girls, you have the Prosper girls who are number 1, 2 points ahead of Allen, and then on the boys' side, you have Allen number 1, 1 point ahead of Prosper. So we are headed to, wouldn't you know, they play each other on March 17th, right when district play resumes. So you're going to get essentially 2 matchups that could very well decide the district championship right out of the chute.
Isn't Prosper the only team to beat Allen in district as well?
On the girls' side?
On the girls' side, yes.
They're the only team to beat Allen, period, this season.
Yeah, and Prosper is just coming off their first loss of the year to Plano West.
Yeah, so that's what...
that was a bit of surprise.
The plot really did you'd think it, though, because Prosper had just been destroying this district. I mean, the wealth of options that they had on offense, I mean, just racking up 4, 5, 6 goals nightly, and just an absurd just goal differential and whatnot. But yeah, then, I mean, just an uncharacteristic, perhaps they were just due for an off night against Plano West.
I mean, it's 9-6A. I mean, you're playing against some of the best competition, biggest schools. Is anyone going to go undefeated in that district? No. I mean, that's almost impossible. But I believe before the season started, everyone was picking Allen to win the district. At least that's what it seemed like. And I'm not talking about just us. It just seemed like Allen was like the consensus number one team. But especially, I kind of had a hunch Prosper would be in that mix, especially, they didn't lose a non-district game.
With Allen, it's kind of been a curious season. It's almost been kind of I don't want to say because you just mentioned that they might have been the projected favorite to win the district. In some ways, you could, though, frame it that it's been kind of a surprise that they've been as strong as they have, because
they lost a lot of people.
They lost a lot, but then they also had some kids that were, projected returners that have since gone the club route. So, I mean, they've really only got just a few holdovers from that team that made a run all the way to the state semifinals last season that saw like substantial minutes. Players like Anna Reza, Lauren Rhodes, but it's such a young team this season. They have 11 sophomores.
Wow.
I mean, so there was a ton of turnover, and on the whole, though, they've been, still one of the elite teams in the state. That loss to Prosper, 3-2 loss, that's the only loss they've had all season. So in some senses,
even
they might be ahead of schedule in some respects.
That's even
even in non-district. Oh, yeah, because they beat South Lake in non-district. They beat Highland Park in non-district. I mean, they've got some really quality wins.
Don't get me started with Highland Park. Oh, man. You brought up a good point. The kids that go play academy. I've been talking to some coaches the last couple of weeks, and one coach in particular in Frisco was telling me, they're at least in Frisco, and it's a big case all throughout the Dallas area, the DFW. Man, there's handfuls of kids that are out playing academy that would be big time players at each of these high schools. I'd love to see what these teams would look like full strength. And you look at like a team, like I know we'll talk about Frisco in a little bit later, but you look at a team like the Frisco Girls Centennial team. They're at the bottom of the district, and they won a state title 4 or 5 years ago. They've been a playoff team every year I've been covering Frisco, and now they're at last place. Well, they have a lot of kids playing academy, and it's not just them. It's just every school has, at least a couple, some half a dozen, maybe even more, that aren't allowed to play high school. And I'd love to see what these high school teams would look like. I'm not saying they're automatically better than the kids that are on the high school team just because they play academy, but you'd think that they'd be elite talent. I'd love to see what these teams would look like, quote unquote, full strength.
There used to be days back when, for Plano West, which is one of the most successful soccer programs in the state, pound for pound, with all their state championships. And there used to be days once upon a time during signing day when they would actually have to have 2 separate signing ceremonies, one for the kids that were playing for the soccer program within the high school, and then a completely separate soccer signing ceremony for all of the kids that went to the high school but were involved on the club side.
They should have those 2 teams play against each other to see.
It's the only sport where you can end the season and be like, well, was that the best team in the state? Just when you factor in all of the, just all of the kids that might go to a school that plays soccer, but how many of those kids actually play for the high school? It does often pose an odd hypothetical at the end of the season each year in soccer. With District 9-6A, that you've had Prosper now that have been the class of the district. In the same case over on the boys' side. Although that boys' district though has been really competitive.
Yeah.
With 2 matches left, you have 7 teams. 7 of the 8 teams are still in the hunt for a playoff spot. I mean, that's wild.
And it's just Plano's out of the mix, the only team
which is insane, because that was a team that I think at the start of district, when we were doing our predictions for the final standings, I think we all had them in the playoffs. They returned just about everybody from a team that had one of the better teams in the area to not make the playoffs last year. I mean, you get 23, 24 points in your district. I think the year before that actually would have been good enough to finish 3rd. It was just a really, really strong year in that respect. But just a lot of signs pointed to this Plano team being able to take the next step, and they just have not been able to get it right on defense at all this season. But otherwise, it's been just absolutely like nobody is safe. I mean, no matter where you're seated at, anybody has been able to beat anybody, and you've seen that even like the first place team, Allen, they have 4 draws. And but they're just 1 point ahead of Prosper, and then you have a team like Plano West that's made a big leap in the second year under Brennan Satry, and then the 2 McKinney schools are in the mix. Plano East and Jesuit are both just 1 win away from being in that playoff mix. It is setting up for a pretty wild home stretch.
Pretty crazy. McKinney Boyd has 5 draws. Plano West has 4.
Oh, yeah.
That's about as even as it gets.
Yeah.
From 1 to 7.
Devin, what about your districts, man? Has there been a little bit more just sense case in order over and over in Garland ISD or Mesquite ISD? Or
I mean, I have 6 districts. Where do you want me to start?
Saxy, let's hear Saxy.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to start with 10-6A girls because that's where I was on Tuesday night. You had Rowlett and Wiley. They entered the night tied for first place. It's kind of been brewing for a while. Wiley won the first meeting 5-2. In the game, they jumped on Rowlett, scored 4 goals.
Yeah.
In the first half, which is more than Rowlett had allowed in the rest of their district games combined. So it was a showdown for first place, and it was a really good match. Rowlett was able to get a measure of revenge. They win 3-1. Reagan Powell gets the game winner. Reagan Powell's kind of an overlooked player. I mean, when you hear about people talk about top prospects and whatnot, she's an Alabama commitment. She has 38 goals this season.
Holy moly!
Yeah, and this is not against playing subpar competition. I mean, right? That's a solid district that they're playing in, and they play tough, just non-district competition. So, Taylor Conway scored twice the other night. She's got 19 goals and 16 assists. So Rowlett edges out to, they do the points. We always have to, you always have to kind of figure out, okay, shootout, overtime, how did this happen? So Rowlett has 30 points. Wiley drops back to second with 27 points. And Saxy has 27 points. Saxy's just been kind of lurking. They were actually in first place for a while, and they lost to Rowlett, and they lost to Wiley in the first game of the second half of the season. So they kind of fell off the radar a little bit, but they keep winning. And keep in mind, this is a Saxy team that has won at least a share of the district championship 9 straight years. Last year in the season in the district finale, I should say, they trailed Rowlett by a point coming in, scored a late goal to win 3-2, and they caught Rowlett to keep their streak of district championships alive. And as fate would have it, on the final day of the regular season, on March 20th, Saxy hosts Rowlett. So
as it should be.
Yes, and so it's still going to come down. And I talked to Coach Jason Forgress from Rowlett, and they're not getting ahead of themselves, but they know that there was a huge win on Tuesday in a game that they had circled on their calendars. But they know there's another big one coming up, and Saxy, in all likelihood, is going to have the chance to force that tie and extend that streak of district championships with a win. But again, Rowlett got them 3-1 or 4-1, solid win the first time. So it should be fun. Like I say, as far as my other girls district, let me just touch on those real quick. We still have 2 weeks to go. Mesquite ISD is out of 11-6A. That's been one where Tyler Lee's and the Rockwall schools have kind of run away with it. Same kind of similar thing in 13-5A where Forney's run away with it. I think Poteet is in really good shape to make the playoffs. West Mesquite could make a push, but as far as the girls side of things, 10-6A is where most of my drama is. Boys, drama all over the place. So. Oh, did you want me to keep going with that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't know we were just kicking somebody else for a while. I've been talking for long enough.
You can't just leave me with a cliffhanger like that.
Yeah,
I want to hear about this drama.
I know this is soccer. I mean, we've got all this stuff to catch up on here. 10-6A boys is kind of similar to the girls.
Just I guess, just the biggest thing going on right now.
Yeah. Well, 10-6A is the Rowlett, because you have the top 4 teams separated by 6 points going down the stretch, and they've all beaten each other. I mean, Rowlett's in first place with 25 points, Naaman 23, Saxy 22, North Garland 19. But this has been one of those districts where even the teams at the bottom of the districts can compete at the top. I mean, they've had 15 matches go to overtime or shootouts. And that's across the board. Rowlett's in first place, but they've gone to 4 shootouts. And it's not just been against that top tier. It's been against, your Lakeviews and your Garlands and your Wileys who, you don't have a team that's sitting down there with 0 points or 2 points. Even the last place team has 9 points. So they've been able to go out and win on occasion. So, like on the girls' side, Saxy and Rowlett play in the season finale on March 20th. As far as those top 4 teams go, that's the only matchup between that upper tier. So you're kind of looking at those other teams trying to avoid pitfalls. But as I mentioned, that second tier has proven to be, has the ability to win against the top. So every time I do the standings, I'm shuffling people around all season long, and I don't expect anything different here these next couple of weeks.
Chris, with District 6XA between Louisville ISD and Capel, obviously an area that is never lacking in quality talent when it comes to high school soccer. So as you've been kind of getting familiar with this district, and I guess specifically Capel, with what they've been able to showcase, what is kind of your read right now on just what is the thing that has jumped out about District 6XA so far as we near the home stretch?
Well, I think you pretty much said it with 6XA. Those school districts, there's so much talent there. Girls, boys. Girls, you've got 4 teams ranked in the top 18 top 20 in the country by Top Drawer Soccer. You've got boys. You've got Flower Mound Marcus is 4th in the country, and Capel just beat them in boys, by the way. Now, Capel didn't win one of their first 6 games. Now they're in a playoff spot.
Which is so absurd for Capel, given their history.
Crazy. Yeah, they just won a state championship a few years ago. Obviously, a lot of expectations, playoffs, 20-plus straight years. I went there yesterday, and they just said everything completely changed. They got a lot of new guys coming through the program, and they just kind of thought, we're Capel, we'll let the returners kind of take over, we'll be okay. But then it just kind of clicked 4 or 5 games in that, no, we got to work for it. Yeah. We can't just walk in saying we're Capel Soccer. They made formation changes, 4 in the back, so many different things. And they got the sophomore goalie, Arath Valdez, who they're really high on. Yeah, they're in the playoff spot. They just beat, like I said, the 4th best team in the country by one publication. And they're hot. I mean, they've won 4 in a row in this district, so they're right there. Then the girls in a playoff spot. I know they were ranked one of the best teams in the country going in, but in this district,
they were the preseason number 1.
It's just such a tough district. They just had a really, really tough loss the other night to Marcus, but they're still in a playoff spot in this district. You got Flower Mound's one of the best teams in the country in first place. You got Marcus is right behind them. It's just. In Capel girls soccer, they got so many talented girls too. I mean, their goalie. I think Coach told me one game had 17 1v1 saves.
Wow, Lauren Collette.
That's why, and I think we see why she's going to TCU. They've got a couple other girls going D1, but
17.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
What does that say about the defense, though? Having 17 one-on-one chances is not exactly ideal.
You look at just the rest of this district, and what's kind of jumped out on my end has just been the kind of the dominance just from start to finish for 2 particular teams. On the girls' side, you just mentioned Flower Mound, and just the job that they've done. Now, they are ranked, number 1 in the state by, the TGCA and Top Drawer Soccer, and I believe, I don't know nationally where they stack up, but the Lady Jaguars are having a special year. Now, it's ironic, too, because we're about to talk about how dominant these 2 teams have been. I'm speaking of the Flower Mound girls and the Marcus boys, and they both had their unbeaten, or I guess their, what would it be? Their perfect record, I should say, snapped on Tuesday. As you mentioned, Marcus boys losing to Capel, and then Flower Mound had its first non-win, you should say, with a draw against Hebron. They allowed their very first goal in all of district on Tuesday.
I know, that's ridiculous. I mean, you can see why they're second in the country right now. That's pretty ridiculous.
They had pitched 10 shutouts to begin and had posted an absurd goal differential of plus 43. And this is, again, in the district that features, Marcus, Capel, Hebron, all teams that have been state or nationally ranked throughout the course of the season. And it's like, who knows ultimately who they decide to give the MVP to in this district, but I mean, the MVP at this point is the Flower Mound defense. Again, if you've only allowed 1 goal throughout the juncture of your district schedule, and the thing is, like, they've got a lot of, there's a lot of youth back there. I believe on their back line, they're they've only really got one senior, Paige Slaughter, that's among the major contributors. The junior and Madison Schott, a pair of sophomore twins, and Hallie and Hannah Augustine. And it's crazy too because you could argue that their best defensive player isn't even on the field right now this season, with Marianne Baltmanis suffering an ACL injury early in the season. But they've got they rotate between a couple goalkeepers, Peyton Whipple, Molly Kaufman. They've just been racking up shutouts left and right. It's a team that is, on the one hand, been incredible defensively, but they've also been really, really fortuitous in close matches. You look at the stretch that they're right now about to embark on. I mentioned that they tied Hebron on Monday, so fair play to Olivia Hassler with Hebron for being the first player in the district to crack the code and figure out how to score on Flower Mound's defense. But the first go-around in district, that stretch, they played Hebron, Marcus, and Capel, and they won all 3 of those matches by scores of just 1-0. So, again, some good fortune in close matches. We'll see how much changes, though, the second swim through.
I think that just speaks about the district, too. It's going to be a dogfight every night. I mean, I would not want to be a team playing any of these teams in the playoffs, honestly. Even your 4th seed is a team that could make it all the way to state.
Yeah, and I mean, despite their dominance, that they still have not locked up the district championship yet.
That's what's crazy.
They're only 4 points ahead of Marcus in second place with 3 matches to go. So the Lady Marauders, still very much in the thick of things. They're having a great season too. They've got 40 goals in district as well. I mean, it is crazy the wealth of talent there in that district. Then you look on the boys' side, where it's actually been a bit more demonstrative for Marcus. They actually have, I guess, with 3 matches left, they have wrapped wrapped up the district championship. They do have a 10-point lead on second place Irving, but that's kind of been the story of their season, is just the wealth of scoring options that they have. 37 goals in district play. Nobody else has more than 21, and it's just so many different options. Harvey Castro, Zach Castro, Sam Coe, Tomas Pondeca, Porter Pomacol, who's actually got an older brother, I believe, who plays for FC Dallas. So obviously some pretty good soccer genes in that family. But and that's a team that started off district on such a hot streak, scoring at least 3 goals in their first 8 district matches. But they haven't hit that mark since over their last 3. So perhaps maybe the second swim through district play teams are having a bit of a better idea on how to scheme against them and whatnot. So I'm curious to see if that's a trend that kind of holds serve the rest of the way. But they're at least assured the 1 seed, which certainly helps looking ahead to the postseason. But nevertheless, some very, very dominant soccer being submitted over at Flower Mound and Marcus. Same for Wakeland, Bryan.
Speaking of Wakeland, you took the words right out of my mouth. Death, Taxes, and Frisco Wakeland boys soccer just dominating. They've scored over 50 goals in district in 14 games. They've given up 10. So if we're talking, 40 goal differentials, and Wakeland's got it. They enter the week with 38 points. They will be the district champions once again. They've scored over 70 goals on the season, and according to Top Drawer, they're ranked number 4th in the entire state. That's any classification. That puts them ahead of teams like Southlake, Duncanville, Allen, etc. I've been told, and just from the last, seeing them play last year, the majority of their team being juniors, and it kind of seems like the Coppell team that Chris just alluded to. A lot of returning players. We knew that they were going to be very, very good once again. I was told that this could be the best team that Wakeland has had, at least since Coach Holt's tenure. Coach Holt's been to state every year since he came to Wakeland 3 years ago.
So at that point, how do you parse between how one team being better than the other when they're all incredible?
The first year, it was really unexpected. They had a bunch of new guys. The second year was a little more expected. And then last year, they didn't actually win state. They made it to state and then lost in a close one. So, But then, pretty much that entire starting lineup is back, and guys that have been playing big minutes since they were freshmen and sophomores, Mark Rabonis, Todd Fuller, Bryce Bezdek, the list goes on and on and on. This team is loaded. I expect them to see them at Standard Stadium in the regional tournament, and I expect them to play at Georgetown. On the girls' side, Frisco Wakeland girls, the dominant run they've been on over the last few years, they might not make the playoffs. Right now, they're the 5 seed. They've dominated against the bottom half of the district, but against the top half, the Independences, the Lebanon Trail, who's been a surging team in this district. Memorial, who I think is a bit of surprise. Their head coach is Rafael Flores, who's the previous head coach at Prosper. When I first started working here 4 years ago, he was helped build that program to what it is now. So Memorial's in good hands. It's no surprise with him leading the way there that they're in the playoff mix. But yeah, if the playoffs were to start today, Wakeland girls would not be in it. The Independence girls team, they're dominating right there with Lebanon Trail. They've tied both times they've played against each other so far this year. So Lebanon Trail, I'm going to speak with Coach Caitlin Luters later today for a story. But they're going to be duking it out neck and neck for a district title. They're the only 2 teams that have clinched. We'll see who out of Memorial, Liberty, and maybe Wakeland who can make the playoffs there. But that Frisco district, I mentioned Centennial earlier. I mean, they're 1-13 or whatever it is, and a lot of other districts they're fighting for a playoff spot. That's just how good Frisco ISD from top to bottom is in boys and girls soccer.
Before we get out of the first half of the podcast, I do want to touch on a little bit of 8-5A. So between Lake Dallas, Little Elm, the Colony, just what has been kind of the biggest takeaway right now, either on the boys' side or the girls' side between that district?
I mean,
Lake Dallas boys.
Yeah, look at them. I mean, they started off the season slow, right? We were talking about that, I think, when I first came here.
It was the preseason from hell for the Falcons.
We were freaking out for them, and then all of a sudden,
now they look like a team that went to the regional finals last year. Now they're number 1. They've got this thing locked up, and I'll go talk to them next week when I get back from San Antonio for girls basketball, but I bet you they're very excited over there. Both their soccer programs, boys and girls, are number 1 in that district. So that's a good time on campus. Good winter month there, honestly, for sports.
It was only a matter of time before that boys team got it on the right track. I think it's for the folks who don't know, Lake Dallas, despite having their best season ever last year, going to the regional finals, they did not win a single game in their non-district schedule. Just unheard of. And this is with a team that brings back a ton of experience. A team that was very much on the radar as a potential state title contender in 5A. But yes, it does seem like things things are finally starting to take a turn for the better right now. How about between Little and Bryan? What's shaking over there?
Little girls soccer, back in the mix for a district title. I know
they just had that big win there, choosing that at Lake Dallas. Got a couple of goals there. They had the PK there near the end of the first half. Now they got that playoff spot locked up. Really good night there. And if that's not even the first place team in their district, that's the team that's going to go far in the playoffs, I think.
Pretty impressive for Little. They had, was it like 7 girls go play, go sign last year to play college soccer. They lost the district MVP and Amaya Grace and Reagan Dykes and a bunch of other key players. And, here they are. And I told you about Landry Townsend. She scored a goal the other night.
Scorer. Yeah. And their defense the other night, too, was phenomenal.
And they lost a bunch of their big defensive players, but they have really a good goalkeeper they're really high on. This is a Little girls team that's, like I said, graduated a lot of players, but still has a lot of players with experience from a team that lost.
And they're getting better as the season goes on. They've had a couple big wins the last few weeks. That's a testament to their coaching staff too, just for getting you so much better as the season goes on. Now I think they're peaking at the right time, just kind of like the Capel boys are in 6-6A, like we talked about a couple minutes ago.
Oh, whereas the tenor of the podcast has been, generally a pretty positive one. Well, it's going to take a turn over the back half as we have more sad clown face action on the high school basketball courts and the craziest coaching
DeAndre Jordan saga.
The craziest coaching saga to pass through our coverage area in some time. That and more after a quick break. And we are back, and we're going to transition now from talking some high school soccer to hitting things up on the hard court. Because right now, if you think back to Monday's podcast, guys, and the general tenor of the boys basketball playoffs has been a bit downtrodden, given how quickly so many of our teams have been dismissed from the postseason. And wouldn't you know it? Just form held on Tuesday. So we have 3 more teams that have played the final game of their respective seasons, including one who had a perfect season go up in smoke. So let's rip the Band-Aid off out in Carrollton. The dream season, the pursuit of perfection for Newman Smith came to an end in the regional quarterfinals as they ran into Kimball, a team that is well known as being one of the powerhouse programs in the state over the last many years and whatnot. So the Kimball Knights were able to hand Newman Smith their first loss of the season, and it wasn't even close. 101 to 73, and if you're breaking 100 points in the postseason, that is making a statement right there. I mean, you look at that. I mean, that's NBA level output in a 32-minute high school basketball game. This was a matchup between number 6 in the state versus number 8. Obviously, Kimball revealed there's a bit of a chasm there, more so than you'd expect. But the story of this one coming in was, if you looked at this Kimball team and just just on paper, it's a team that Newman Smith just hadn't seen anything like that all season, and not just in terms of just the top shelf talent with one of the absolute best sophomores in the state in Arterio Morris, but just how big and long and athletic that roster was. I think like half their roster is comprised of dudes at least 6'4", and it sounds like that length really kind of caught Newman Smith by surprise on Tuesday and really kind of prevented their that offense from ever fully finding a rhythm. And it didn't help then when Kimball was just bombing away from 3 as well. I mean, it's crazy. They scored at least 30 points in two of those 4 quarters on Tuesday. Bobby Smith for Newman Smith was able to at least get going on his own, 27 points and whatnot. But you mentioned on in the second round against Centennial how their leading scorer Jaron Cook had a bit of an off game by his standards, was 4 points. He had only 3 in this game, so I don't know if it's just if there was an injury late in the season that he was having to kind of play through or whatnot. But an uncharacteristic close to what's been one of the better careers of any athlete to pass through Newman Smith's basketball program.
Yeah, I'm not sure what was going on with Jaron Cook. I mean, I didn't even think to ask Coach Percy Johnson, right? Percy Johnson,
yeah.
Jackson, yeah. I didn't even ask him about that. The rest of the team just played so well. I felt like they didn't even need Jaron Cook. I felt like they were their starting 5 plus their 6th man. Thibaut Tagnon was so good, and their big man Damani Villarreal was just so dominant that they didn't really need Jaron Cook. But it is kind of alarming to see his the last 2 playoff games, 7 combined points, and then when you told me he's the only kid on the roster that's signed to go play college basketball, which is also surprising.
He was an all-area pick for us last year, no doubt. I mean, he's a great player.
No doubt. But I've seeing guys like Bobby Smith and the big man Damani and Thibaut, I figured those guys would be at least signed somewhere. I was kind of surprised that Jared Cook was the only guy. But against Kimball, in the playoffs, you're going to need your leading scorer, your star player, to really step up. I was disappointed to see the outcome against Kimball, but man, Kimball's been doing this to everyone.
Yeah.
They beat Independence by double digits, but they were beating them pretty good. Morris had 36 points. After that game, I looked him up. 4-star recruit, Kansas, yada yada yada. He's that special talent, right there with like a Keontae George type player.
For sure.
So there's no shame to losing, to a team like Kimball, who, their only losses really, like what you were telling me before we got on the air, was like to Lancaster and other state.
Yeah, because that's the thing with Kimball is like, whereas they might not have as glossy a win-loss record as Newman Smith did heading into this matchup.
Yeah.
Yes, you look at the schedule that Kimball has played and the teams that they've taken losses to. They have 2 losses to Lancaster, the number 1 team in 5A. They have, 2 losses to South Oak Cliff, the number 9 team in 5A entering the playoffs. They lost to Katy Morton Ranch, who's number 14, I think, over in 6A. They're playing in their regional tournament. So they lost to some pretty heavyweight programs that, obviously Newman Smith did not see that caliber of opposition on their schedule. But still, obviously still, even though it doesn't end the way that I'm sure that the Trojans had any visions of it ending in a, a near 30-point blowout, but still a history-making season for them. They matched their deepest playoff run ever, getting to the regional tournament for the first time since, I want to say, 2006. Still a special group for that program, all things considered. Obviously, though, in the moment, though, it certainly does sting when your season goes up in smoke in such decisive fashion. But yeah, this sets the stage for, who knows what kind of, if Kimball's able to win one more game and perhaps draw Lancaster then in the regional tournament. Because there aren't too many players that I would imagine Lancaster has seen that have the ability to match Mike Miles, just from his output. Kimball's got one of them. That's got to count for something for sure.
But they have 3 of them. That's the thing about Lancaster is they just run so many guys. It's not just Mike Miles. Obviously he's kind of the headliner, but they've just got so many. Marco Taylor. Marco Foster, I should say. They've just got so many guys on that team. But it'll be fun. You mentioned Kimball scoring 101. That Lancaster team is capable of scoring 101. What guy? Could you imagine the pace in that one?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, and that's the thing. Obviously, when you score over 100 points, it wasn't just one guy that did the heavy lifting. Morris finished with 23 points, and despite being a point guard, he had 10 rebounds and 4 assists and whatnot. But Marcus Bonner, DeMarcus Rolston, they all had 20 points apiece. It sounds like this is a very, very deep, talented team that Newman Smith just ran into, a team unlike any that was on their schedule, and it panned out as such. Let's see whether it's Celina or Mesquite Horn, who had their respective seasons end. Where do we want to go with this next gentleman?
Man, oh man. Talk about another Dallas ISD area, program and Dallas Carter. They're about as good as advertised. The number 2 team in the state in 4A. All 5 of their starters, every guy that came in off the bench was just a baller. That they would be one of the top players for Celina. The 8th guy off the bench. They had a 6'9" kid that was just scoring at will in the third quarter. They had a 6'5" guard. And Jalen Williams, who had 17 points in the first quarter. He outscored Celina by himself. He hit 3 threes. He had an alley-oop dunk. He had a fast break dunk. How do you stop that when a guy's hitting from the outside, scoring at will in the paint? And Coach Bobby Stastny told me after the game that, on film, they hadn't seen him shoot the 3-ball like that in the 5, 6, 7 games that they had seen on him. So they started the game out in the zone. Well, if Carter is hitting their threes, it's game over for you, because if they're tearing up your zone, then you got to go to man, and then they're probably more athletic than most of any other team you're playing is personnel. So then you go to man, and then you're kind of screwed. But Celina held their own, and that was despite Carson Stastny having one of his poor shooting performances on the year. I think he was 3 for 12. He missed 4 or 5 free throws, and this dude is automatic from the free throw line. I've seen this kid hit 12 free throws in a row in a fourth quarter to close out Melissa in district play. An all-area kid from last year, Carson Stastny. No he still had like 14 points, but it wasn't like his normal 14 or normal 20 or whatever that he averages. This Carter was just a little too much. Celina was chipping away. They got it within 10 points a couple times in the third and fourth quarter, but Carter was just a little too much. Do I think Carter's the second best team in the state? I don't know, maybe not, but they're just a notch above Celina, and a great in for the season for Celina, making it to the third round, third straight district title after not having won a district title in 40 years, prior to 3 years ago with this group of seniors led by Carson Stastny, leading the way. It's been a very special group, and the JV and the younger kids at Celina, they have some big shoes to fill.
So it's just a question of just how long you can go before you run into one of those DISD juggernauts.
And that's the thing with so many, at the 4A and 5A level, you're bound to, especially being in the DFW, like the Frisco District last year, having to run into teams like Lancaster, like it's going to happen, or Kimball, these teams, it's going to happen, and that's just it's hard to make it state because there's the boogeyman Dallas ISD here.
Devin with Horn, they ran into the number 3 team in the state, Colleen Ellison, and the final result was about, I guess, what one might expect. So what was the takeaway though from the Jaguars and their swan song to the 2019-20 season?
I was a little bit surprised just because we talked last week about the fact that Horn has played a lot of state-ranked opponents this year and won a lot of those games and competed well in a lot of those games. They just couldn't get untracked. Yeah. On Tuesday. I mean, they were down 17-4 early on, down 41-20 at halftime, and that was really it. I mean, they played better in the second half. It was more even, but when you're already down 20, that doesn't doesn't get you anywhere. If you would have told me that they were going to score 52 points beforehand, I would have said they're going to get beat by 20. That's not their style. That's not the pace they like to play. You look at their scoring line. Zakir Sawyer scores 13 points. Isaiah Chandler and Donovan Payne each score 9. Okay, this is a team that routinely has 3 or 4 guys in double figures when they're firing all cylinders. Preston Amond. Their 6'7" versatile forward was hurt on the final play of regulation in their overtime win against McKinney. Did not play on Tuesday, so that hurt him. But that certainly wasn't the only factor. Right? Horn had been prone to a couple of those games. There was a couple during district where they just were kind of off, and they were able to overcome that. But they weren't playing the number 3 team in the state in Ellison. But, all things considered, it was a great season for Horn. I mean, this is only the second time they've ever made it to the regional quarterfinals. So hats off to them for that. As for the future, it's really interesting to see because they had, of the 15 players they had on their playoff roster, 11 of them were seniors.
Wow.
And of the, I believe, 8 players who scored on Tuesday, 7 were senior. The only person that scored that's going to be coming back next year is Bryson Smith, who's a sophomore, who's a nice piece. He hit the game-tying free throw against McKinney to send it to overtime last week. But Horn's been able to bring some new guys up and to kind of be able to rebuild. I mean, reload instead of rebuild. But when you lose in that quality of a senior class that was able to kind of make history for that program, interesting to see where they go next year. But obviously, hats off to them for a great season this year.
Just a continuation of what's been a very, very short-lived postseason in Star Local Media for boys basketball. Whereas we got 3 teams that are headed to, as I stated, on the girls' side with Argyle, Frisco Liberty, and McKinney. The boys' side, though, it's been a bit of a different story. All right, so let's close this out with something that I guess wasn't anticipating that we'd be talking about this, but as of yesterday afternoon, certainly one of the more bizarre stories to come down the pipe in our coverage area in some time. So so my plan on Tuesday was to go cover that Newman Smith-Kimball game, and then I start getting word earlier in the week that hey, school board meeting tomorrow night at Plano ISD. It's looking like the Wildcats might have found their man. And, okay, well, if there's anything that's going to drag me out to a school board, I think I've only covered one other school board meeting in my time at the paper, and it was when Terry Gamble was named Allen's next head coach. So, yes, I was sure enough had to put basketball on hold for a night, and I was out of the PISD Administrative Center to watch Cody Moore of Denton-Braswell get approved by the school board as the next head coach at Plano Senior. So
I feel like this story is about to take a turn.
So for folks who have not heard, yes, the story did in fact take a very, very unexpected turn. So, you began to hear kind of some rumors circulating, at least in my neck of the woods early yesterday afternoon, that I'm hearing that Coach Moore might not exactly be taking the job after all. And whoa. What do you mean? And then
it's been approved.
Yes, I saw him in person. I talked to him. I have the audio. I can confirm it. It was not just a dream. And then at I guess right around 3:30 or so, you get the video that was posted by the Denton ISD Twitter account, which I believe you have on your phone right now, Bryan. Yeah. And it's of Coach Moore. You can tell a very emotional Coach Moore addressing his players at Braswell, and he tells them that he is in fact staying. And if you haven't seen the video, it's all over social media. It did sort of go viral, but I mean, the players just erupt. Just they swarm him with hugs and cheers, and it's such a it's a pretty nice little reaction.
Well, because it was supposed they thought it was a farewell.
Oh yeah,
they thought coach was coming by to say his last goodbyes, and so I don't think they had any idea, and you could tell by their reaction.
Mm-hmm. It was almost like that scene on Wolf of Wall Street. I know it's not kid-friendly movie. Like, I'm not leaving.
So what was? Yeah, this floored a lot of people just because of the surprising nature of how far along in this process they had got. I mean, I'm sure there's been times in years past where you've had a coach interview for a job, and then after the interview you go home, you think about it again, talk it over with your family and whatnot, and you just you have a bit of a change of heart. But to get as far as they did in this process, where he was. Not only did he accept the job at Plano, but he was then approved by the school board. I mean, they were ready to begin the Cody Moore era with the Wildcats, and then to have the about face. I just can't recall anything quite like that, at least in my time at the paper. What was y'all's just initial reaction to seeing this bizarre circumstance unfold?
Plano ISD. No, I'm just kidding. No, just because of it's just been Plano ISD has kind of been the epicenter of all these crazy events over the last year or so. But I have done stories. Because they're head football coaches, and a lot of people try to keep this really hush-hush. Mm-hmm. And I've done stories. I've interviewed coaches that have accepted the position, only to back out later. But the big difference is this was pre-school board approval. Yeah. This was. I had the story ready to go just because I wanted to, maybe I could make the school board meeting, or maybe I just wanted to release it as soon as the second it was released. But I've had that happen a handful of times where I've talked to coaches and they've gushed over the job they're about to take and about the new administration and about the school district, and then they sleep on it, or they go home and talk to their family, and they ultimately decide that's not the right thing for them, or maybe sometimes it's a salary thing. But regardless of the reason, at the bottom line, it's their decision. Mm-hmm. But that's what was so bizarre about the case. What happened yesterday is all these cases, it was all done. Nothing was public. No one ever knew about this except for a handful of people. Mm-hmm. This was brought to the school board, approved. He was, he talked to you. He talked to other media. This was a done deal.
He took pictures with players in attendance.
Players, yes, and that the story was on. It was done. It was a done deal. And to change your mind after that, again, I guess it's his prerogative. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that works in terms of if he officially signed his contract, and I don't know how that works in terms of that. But that just the fact of the matter that he'd already been presented in front of the school board, he'd been approved. That's usually the final step.
For sure.
Any kind of deliberation inside of whether or not you're going to back out or not usually takes place beforehand. And I don't remember, you've seen it sometimes in colleges where things get crazy.
For sure.
They agree to contract terms and then something happens and, all heck breaks loose. But no, in terms of around here especially, I don't remember anything like it.
What I'm thinking is, maybe he was already second-guessing the decision before that school board meeting Tuesday. Why else would you, one day after the fact, you just make another humongous decision, be like, I'm going to stay. Maybe the whole time he was like, man, Plano ISD, they haven't been in the right place for, 20 years now? At least 10 years now. The Plano ISD hasn't been what it's been. Maybe that Plano job isn't as sexy as it's made out to be. Maybe that's what it is. Granted, he started Denton-Braswell. He helped open that school, and they're making huge steps. Making the leap to 6A obviously next year, but I think it's more so on Plano. I think it's just not that coveted of a position anymore.
Because it's a case where with Braswell, because obviously to hear the comments from Coach Moore since then, at least the word that's that's out there in the public is just it sounds like just the connection that he had with Braswell was so unique that getting away from that was something that he just couldn't bring himself to do. And again, it's a case where you have to get him get some truth serum in him, but maybe find out obviously there was speculation whether it was something on Plano's end, whether maybe Denton ISD came in at the 11th hour with just something that he couldn't turn down.
Maybe so.
Or again, maybe he just loves Braswell that much, because the truth is, this is Coach Moore's first ever head coaching job, and it's a unique one in the respect that he's the only head coach this program has ever had. He built this thing from the ground up. So I think that versus taking over an established program as your first ever head coaching job, when you legit when you are the face of that program in a sense, I think you build the connection that you build with those kids is a little bit different. So and you can clearly see based on that video how much those kids love him, and so whether or not it was something like that he just, again, he couldn't bring himself to turn his back on. It's again, it's all just conjecture at this point.
If Plano was fresh off, a third round trip in the playoffs, and they didn't have all these, I don't want to say failures, but these letdown of seasons over the last 5-10 years. If Plano was still kind of Plano maybe 15-20 years ago, you're taking that job, are you not?
But I think it's also a case of this is kind of ushering in a new era in Plano ISD athletics, because a lot of that regime is obviously the athletic director. They've had a big change there within the last month. You wonder how just how Jeff Smith must have been feeling when he was told this news. His first hire, his first big hire, and then to have this be the way that it goes. The reaction around the community after this news was one of wow, okay, not bad, Plano. You get a guy who's had who turned this Braswell program into from 3 wins in 2018 to 9 wins last year. His track record on the offensive side of the ball with Rockwall and Horn and now Braswell. It was a chance to see really a brand new era in Plano Wildcat football.
Outside of the circle.
Oh, yeah.
Someone that didn't have those deep Plano ties, and something that kind of bring an outside perspective in.
That's always been something that Plano ISD has sort of been kind of criticized for in the past.
So he has no Plano connection whatsoever?
No. But then to have it go this way, and it is kind of funny just to see how this was all received, on social media and whatnot. Whereas that video went viral, and this is what an outstanding moment, it's so good for you, Coach Moore. And whereas on the one hand, it's awesome for those Braswell kids because again, that's the only coach that they've known at the high school level. But then you got to wonder on the other side of the Metroplex, how the heck are those Plano kids feeling?
Yeah.
When you have Coach Smith coming in there and explaining to them that, this guy that you just saw last night that was announced as your head coach, he ain't coming here. So it's, because again, there was a lot of turnout there at that school board meeting. There was a lot of maroon and white, lots of kids, lots of parents. Coach Kimbrough, one of the most iconic coaches in the state's history, was out there for this one. And he said he took pictures with everybody after the fact. And really, again, he sounded like he was ready to go and was really ready to embrace himself and, immerse himself in just the history and tradition that Plano senior football is about and be the man to help, kind of resurrect that program now. And yeah, it's definitely kind of puts PISD in a bit of an awkward spot now going forward. And again, they're just going to look to move as fast as they can to get this thing filled, and we'll see where it goes. But yes, Cody Moore will not in fact be coaching the Plano Wildcats going forward. I did obviously after hearing this, I was like, okay, well let's see. Well, because the thing, Braswell is making the jump to 6A, and as productive as things were last year in 7-5A Division II, where they were able to get a share of the district title and whatnot, go 2 rounds deep in the playoffs. You're now in the same district as Allen and Geyer and Prosper and even McKinney and whatnot. And it's
little L.
The playoffs are no guarantee for Braswell next year at all. Not at all. When you look at the some of the talent in 5-6A, but they're also going to be in the neighboring district with Plano ISD and Louisville ISD and Capel over in 6-6A. So I was wondering, what would it take to potentially get Plano and Braswell in the playoffs?
Rivalry as old as time.
And because, if that game were to happen, though, man, can you imagine, though, just the emotion leading into that one?
You don't think things would be died down by then? There'd be some bad blood?
I think after a situation like this, as unprecedented and rare as a situation like this is, it'll die down in time, but obviously in the moment, at least within the first year afterwards, those two schools that I don't know how many times they've ever played each other in athletics, period, across anything, but they're now going to be linked in a way in football, just with this bizarre turn of events. But the odds of them ever colliding in the postseason are highly unlikely. Plus, Plano ISD has obviously the 3 largest enrollments in District 6-6A. Plano has the 3rd highest of those enrollments. So in order for them to go Division II and draw Braswell at some point in the postseason, you would need all 3 Plano ISD schools to make the playoffs. Should also note that Plano ISD collectively missed the playoffs last year for the first time in 30 years. So I don't know if that scenario is going to pan out next season. I would not be one to place money on it. But yes, just a fascinating story. Certainly one, and you mentioned this, Devin, too. Like, just the last 6-7 months for Plano ISD, and just some of the headlines that school district has generated. I've been reporting for the Plano Star-Courier since 2009, and I think over the course of the first 10 years in the paper, there were not as many combined as there have been over the last 6 months. As far as, you think back to the El Paso Eastwood situation with Plano, and a story that made national news and was, again, as wild a story as anything that Plano ISD athletics has ever been embroiled in. And then it leads to the football season itself with, like I just mentioned, all 3 teams missing the playoffs for the first time in 3 decades. That leads to then the change at, or at least, then later on is the change at athletic director with Gerald Brent's retiring, Jeff Smith coming in. 8 days later, they reassign the longest tenured head coach among the 3 high schools in Jadon McCullough. And then now they hire a guy who then backs out of the job, or at least stays at his...
What's next?
It has become some high drama over in Plano ISD that we did not necessarily have the first 10 years of my tenure with the paper. So it's wild. Yeah, what a story yesterday that developed between Plano and Braswell. Just wanted to obviously bring some thoughts on that to the air, since that was a story that dominated local Texas high school football circles yesterday. And that'll do it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. We will be back on Monday to probably talk some fallout from the state girls basketball tournament. And who else knows where Monday's episode will take us? So until then, folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.